They called him Josaphat, a man chained not for labor, but for breeding. On Virgil Barron's plantation, he was forced to father more than 200 children, children he could never claim, only watch from the shadows as they grew under the whip. One stormy night, those children rose. They dragged their master from his bed, butchered him at their father's feet, and swore they would never live as cattle again. But freedom bought with blood carries a terrible cost. As patrols closed in, Josaphat faced the truth: either turn his children into an army, or watch them be slaughtered one by one. This is not just a tale of rebellion. It's a legend born of cruelty and fire. Because when the man bred for silence finally spoke, his voice shook the South. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The sun broke through the trees like a slow burn, painting the Georgia sky in shades of orange and red. Josaphat stood at the doorway of the slave quarters, his hands hanging heavy at his sides. The overseer's whip cracked against the dirt beside him. "Move, boy! Master's got guests." Josaphat knew what that meant. He kept his eyes on the ground and walked, each step measured and careful. His broad shoulders remained square, his face a mask that revealed nothing of the storm inside him. The path to the barn felt longer than usual today. Behind him, the overseer spat. "Faster! They ain't got all day to wait on you." The barn doors stood open. Inside, Virgil Barron's voice rang out with laughter that bounced off the wooden walls. He was a round man with small eyes that never seemed to blink enough. 3 other white men stood with him, glasses of whiskey in hand despite the early hour. "And here he is, gentlemen, the pride of Barron Plantation." Virgil's voice boomed as Josaphat entered. "Strongest buck in the county. Worth his weight in gold, I tell you." Josaphat kept his eyes down. He knew the routine. He'd lived it for 20 years. "How many has he sired now, Virgil?" asked a thin man with a pointed beard. Virgil puffed out his chest. "I'd reckon just over 200. Lost exact count somewhere after 180. He slapped Josaphat's shoulder like he was patting a prized horse. "Solid stock from this one. Strong backs, healthy lungs. Fetch top dollar at market." The men nodded, studying Josaphat as if he were a curiosity in a museum. One man stepped closer, tilting his head. "Doesn't look like much. Just tall is all." "Ha!" Virgil laughed. "Don't let the quiet fool you. Best breeder I've ever owned." In the corner of the barn stood 5 women. They looked anywhere but at Josaphat, or the white men. Their faces were blank, but their eyes held the same pain Josaphat kept locked inside himself. "Show them to the breeding shed," Virgil told the overseer. "I promised Johnson here he could see how we run things." He turned to his guests. "Most efficient operation in the state, gentlemen. My grandfather started it, my father perfected it, and I've made it an art." The overseer motioned for Josaphat and the women to follow him to a small room attached to the barn. It was bare, except for a straw mattress in the corner. The air smelled of dust and despair. "You know what to do," the overseer said to Josaphat. He turned to the women. "Master says the first 2 today. Rest of you wait your turn." 2 of the women stepped forward, eyes still cast down. The youngest couldn't have been more than 16. "I expect results," the overseer said, his hand resting on his whip. "Master doesn't like wasted time." When the door closed, Josaphat finally raised his eyes. He looked at the women and whispered, "I'm sorry." The older woman nodded. It was all they could share, this small moment of humanity in a place that allowed none. "They watching through the cracks," she whispered back. "Make it look real." Outside, they could hear Virgil continuing his boastful tour. "Breeding is a science, gentlemen. You can't just throw any 2 together. You need to select for traits: height, strength, temperament. like horses or dogs. One of the men laughed. "Never thought of it that way." "That's why you're not as rich as me," Virgil replied. In the small room, Josaphat and the women moved about, making sounds, shifting the straw. A performance they had mastered to fool watching eyes while preserving what little dignity remained to them. Josaphat kept count in his head, not the way Virgil did, as tallies of property and profit. He counted faces, names whispered to him in rare moments of privacy, children who called him uncle if they acknowledged him at all, children who worked the fields, who were sold away, who died young. His blood, his legacy, stolen from him piece by piece, 212. That was the true number, not about 180, as Virgil claimed. Josaphat knew each one, even those he'd only glimpsed from afar. After an hour, the overseer opened the door. The women adjusted their clothes and filed out. Josaphat was marched to the next task without a word. The day continued like all others. Brutal work under the Georgia sun. The crack of the whip a constant reminder of his place. But in his mind, Josaphat kept counting. Names, faces, years. The children grown to adults who never knew him as father. When night fell, Josaphat sat alone outside the slave quarters. His muscles ached from the day's labor, but it was the weight in his chest that truly exhausted him. Across the dirt yard, children played in the fading light. His children, though none would ever call him father. A small boy, no more than 5, chased after the others. Josaphat knew him, Martha's youngest, born after a day like today. The boy had Josaphat's eyes, his strong jaw already forming. The child stumbled and fell, then picked himself up without crying. Near the edge of the yard, 3 tall young men stood in the shadows. Abner, the eldest, watched the children with dark, thoughtful eyes. Beside him, his half-brothers Samuel and Isaiah spoke in hushed tones. All 3 were Josaphat's sons, all in their 20s now, all strong men who'd never known a father's guidance. Abner's gaze shifted, meeting Josaphat's across the yard. Something passed between them, not recognition, not quite respect, but awareness. Then Abner nodded, so slightly it could have been a trick of the fading light. The 3 young men exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. Josaphat watched as they moved deeper into the shadows, their backs straight, their movements purposeful. They know, Josaphat thought. They know whose blood runs in their veins. He remained seated, still and silent, as darkness fell completely over barren plantation. In the distance, a dog barked. The children were called inside by tired mothers. Only Josaphat remained, counting stars now instead of children, wondering if either could ever truly belong to him. Dark clouds gathered over barren plantation, turning the afternoon sky the color of bruises. The air grew thick and heavy, pressing down on everything. Lightning flashed in the distance, followed by the low rumble of thunder. Inside the cramped slave quarters, bodies pressed together on the dirt floor. Children curled against mothers. Old men and women huddled in corners. The smell of sweat and fear mixed with the coming storm. In the back of the room, Abner stood tall among his half-brothers and sisters. At 26, he was the eldest of Josaphat's children still on the plantation. His eyes burned with something dangerous as he spoke in hushed tones. "Tonight," he whispered, "the storm will hide our steps." Around him, faces turned, some eager, some afraid. Isaiah, his half-brother, gripped his arm. "Are you sure?" If we fail, we die as men." Abner cut him off. "If we do nothing, we die as cattle." Josaphat sat on a low stool in the corner, watching. He had heard the whispers growing over weeks, had seen the secret meetings. Now he saw the fire in their eyes. His children, planning without him. "We are not his property," Abner continued, his voice barely audible over the rain that had begun to patter against the roof. "We are not breeding stock. We are men and women. And tonight, we take back what was stolen from us." Samuel, another of Josaphat's sons, nodded. "How many are with us?" 208, Abner answered. "Every one of us who shares his blood." He didn't look at Josaphat, but everyone knew who he meant. A young woman, Rachel, one of Josaphat's daughters, stepped forward. "What about the little ones? The white folks will punish them too if we—" "The little ones suffer already," Abner said. "They're born into chains. They'll be sold away. The girls will end up like our mothers." His voice cracked slightly. "No more." Lightning flashed, illuminating the room for a second. In that brief moment, Josaphat saw their faces clearly. His children, carrying his features, his blood, his pain. He stood, and the room fell silent. "You'll all die," Josaphat said softly. "The militia will come. They'll hunt you down like dogs." Abner finally turned to face him. "Better to die standing than live on our knees. They'll kill everyone, even those who didn't fight." "Then what would you have us do?" Abner's voice rose slightly. "Watch as they take more of us to the breeding shed? Watch as our sisters bear children for profit? Watch as they sell our brothers piece by piece?" Thunder crashed overhead. The rain came down harder, drumming against the roof. Josaphat stepped closer to Abner, looking into eyes that mirrored his own. "I have counted each of you," he said. 212 of my blood on this plantation. I know your faces. I know which of you were sold away. I know which of you died in the fields. Then you know why we must do this," Abner said. For a moment, the room was silent, except for the storm. Then Josaphat nodded once. "I cannot stop you, and I will not stand aside while my children fight." A murmur ran through the room. Abner's face showed surprise, then grim satisfaction. "Tonight," he repeated, "when the storm is loudest." They moved through the quarters quietly, gathering others. Some refused, hiding under blankets or shaking their heads. But most joined, Josaphat's sons and daughters, men and women in their 20s and younger, strong from years of field work. Rachel distributed makeshift weapons, kitchen knives stolen over months, farm tools hidden under floorboards, heavy sticks sharpened to points. Hands grasped them nervously, some shaking, some steady. "Stay low," Abner instructed as they gathered by the door. "The rain will cover our sound. Don't speak until we reach the house." Josaphat watched them prepare, his heart heavy with dread and pride. These were his children, planning with skill he never taught them. They had learned to survive in a world that treated them as less than human. The storm reached its peak as they slipped out into the night. Rain poured down, soaking them instantly. Mud sucked at their bare feet as they moved across the plantation grounds. Lightning split the sky, showing glimpses of determined faces, then plunging them back into darkness. Josaphat found himself in the middle of the group, surrounded by his blood. They moved like shadows, field hands who knew every inch of the land they worked. The big house loomed ahead, its windows glowing yellow against the black night. 200 of Josaphat's children spread out, surrounding it silently. Abner gave the signal, a sharp whistle that cut through the storm. They rushed forward as one. The front door splintered under their combined force. Windows shattered as others climbed through. The few house slaves fled or joined them, eyes wide with fear and hope. Screams rose from inside. A gunshot cracked, then another. But there were too many bodies pressing forward, too much rage finally unleashed. Josaphat followed them in, water streaming from his clothes onto the polished wooden floors of the house he had never been allowed to enter. The overseer appeared at the top of the stairs, a gun in his hands. He fired into the crowd, hitting one of Josaphat's daughters in the shoulder. Before he could reload, 5 of Josaphat's sons were on him, dragging him down the stairs. His screams mixed with the thunder as they tore at him with knives and bare hands. In the master bedroom, they found Virgil Barron cowering behind his wife. He wore a white nightshirt that made him look smaller than he did in the daylight. "Please," he begged as they dragged him from the room. "I've been good to you. I've fed you, clothed you." No one answered his pleas. They pulled him outside into the storm, his nightshirt turning transparent in the rain. His bare feet slipped in the mud as they forced him to his knees in front of Josaphat. Lightning flashed, illuminating the scene. Virgil on his knees, surrounded by Josaphat's children, rain pouring down on them all. "You know what he did to us," Abner said to the crowd. "To our mothers, to our sisters." Virgil's eyes widened as he looked up at Josaphat. For the first time, he seemed to understand. "Them?" he whispered. "All of them." Josaphat said nothing. He had no words for this moment. Abner raised his knife. Others followed. In the next flash of lightning, their blades came down. Josaphat stood still as rain washed over him. At his feet, Virgil Barron's blood mixed with mud, spreading in dark pools that the storm slowly washed away. Behind him, the overseer's body lay broken in the yard, torn apart by decades of hatred finally unleashed. The storm raged on. Thunder shook the ground beneath their feet, and Josaphat watched as his children, wet and bloodied, looked at each other with the dawning realization of what they had done, and what must come next. Dawn broke over Barron Plantation with an eerie silence. The storm had moved on, leaving behind a clear sky that promised heat. Puddles dotted the muddy yard between the quarters and the big house. Birds returned to the trees, singing as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The white columns of the big house stood like ghosts in the morning light. Windows gaped open, curtains billowing out like surrendering flags. Dark smoke rose from one side where a fire had been lit, and only partly controlled. The smell of blood hung in the air, mixing with the scent of rain-soaked earth and smoke. Josaphat stood in the yard, his clothes still damp and stained dark with mud and blood. His hands trembled slightly as he stared at the house where Virgil Barron had lived in comfort while they suffered. Around him, people emerged slowly from hiding places and quarters. They gathered in small groups, whispering, staring at the house, at the bloodstains on the steps, at the body of the overseer still lying twisted in the mud. "Is it true?" an old man asked, his voice cracking. "Is the master dead?" No one answered at first. Then Rachel stepped forward, one of Josaphat's daughters, a kitchen knife still gripped in her hand. "He's dead," she said. "We killed him." The words hung in the air. Some gasped. Others nodded with grim satisfaction. A few began to weep, not from sorrow but from the overwhelming weight of what had happened. Abner emerged from the big house, his shirt splattered with blood. Behind him came more of Josaphat's children, carrying ledgers and account books from Barron's study. "These are the papers that say we're property," Abner announced, holding up a leather-bound book. "These list our prices, our children, our worth in dollars." He tossed the book into a puddle, then stomped on it with his bare foot. "We're not property anymore." A murmur ran through the crowd. Some looked afraid, some disbelieving, some hopeful. "What do we do now?" someone called out. All eyes turned to Josaphat. He hadn't spoken a word since the killing. Now everyone looked to him, even his children who had planned the uprising without him. Abner approached him, standing tall before his father. "We need a leader," he said quietly. "Someone they'll listen to." Josaphat shook his head. "I'm just a field hand." "No." Abner's voice grew stronger. "You're our father. You gave us life even when they tried to make you nothing. You endured what no man should endure." Isaiah joined his brother. "The blood that binds us together flows from you." One by one, Josaphat's children stepped forward, forming a circle around him. Some he barely recognized, young men and women who had his eyes, his chin, his height. Rachel placed a hand on his arm. "Lead us," Father. The word, Father, hit him like a physical blow. No one had ever called him that before. Slowly, Josaphat nodded. A cheer went up from the crowd. People rushed forward, touching his shoulders, his hands, as if drawing strength from him. "Burn them," Josaphat said, pointing to the account books. "Burn everything that made us less than human." They built a fire in the yard, feeding it with papers, ledgers, the overseer's whip, and the wooden stocks used for punishment. The flames leaped high, crackling and hissing as they devoured the symbols of their bondage. Women from the house brought out food: bacon, bread, preserves, things they had never been allowed to taste. Children ran freely across the lawn that had been forbidden to them. Men took turns sitting in the master's chair, brought out to the porch. For a few precious hours, freedom tasted sweet on their tongues. They laughed, they ate, they cried. They walked into rooms they had only cleaned but never enjoyed. They touched fine fabrics and delicate glassware. They spoke loudly without fear of punishment. Josaphat watched it all with a strange ache in his chest. This was what had been denied them: simple human dignity, the right to move freely, to speak, to be. Then came the sound, a sharp crack from the distance, a gunshot. Everyone froze. Another shot followed, then another. Isaiah ran up from the road that led to the neighboring plantation. "Riders coming!" he shouted. "They've seen the smoke!" The brief joy shattered like glass. Reality rushed back in. What they had done would not go unpunished. What they had claimed would not be given freely. "Get the children inside," Josaphat ordered, his voice finding a new strength. "Gather any weapons, anything that can be used to fight." People scattered, suddenly purposeful. Women hurried the youngest to safety. Men grabbed tools, kitchen knives, a few firearms taken from the big house. Abner appeared at Josaphat's side with a rifle. "The neighbors are gathering. They'll send for the militia." Josaphat nodded grimly. "They'll kill us all if they can. Then we fight." Rachel joined them, her face set in determination. "Or we run." The swamps to the east. They say runaways have made camps there. Josaphat looked at his children, so brave, so fierce, so unprepared for what was coming. The slave patrols would show no mercy. The militia would be called. White men from miles around would hunt them. "We need time," he said finally. "Time to decide. Time to plan." More gunshots echoed, closer now. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder. A small boy burst into the yard, his eyes wide with terror. "Riders!" he screamed. "Coming up the main road! 20, maybe more!" The peaceful morning shattered completely. People grabbed children and ran for cover. Some headed for the fields, others for the woods behind the quarters. Josaphat stood still, watching them scatter. In his hand, he gripped the handle of a hoe, its blade dark with dried blood from the night before. The sun climbed higher, throwing sharp light across the yard, across the blood-stained steps of the big house, across the faces of his children as they prepared to fight or flee. Josaphat knew, as the hoofbeats grew louder and the shouts of angry men reached his ears, that killing Virgil Barron had been only the beginning. What came next would determine whether they lived as free people or died as rebels. Either way, nothing would ever be the same. The morning sun beat down on their backs as Josaphat led his children away from the big house. They moved through the cotton fields, where rows of green plants stretched toward the horizon. The familiar sight, fields they had worked every day of their lives, now felt different under their feet. This land had been watered with their sweat and blood, yet never belonged to them. Josaphat stopped in a clearing between fields where the overseer used to give daily orders. 200 faces looked back at him, his children, his blood. Some looked afraid, others angry, all waiting for direction. "We have a choice to make," Josaphat said, his voice steady despite the fear in his gut. The slave catchers are coming. The militia will follow. We can scatter, run different ways into the woods. Some might make it north. Most will be caught. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A young woman holding a baby shifted nervously. Or, Josaphat continued, we can stand together, fight together. Abner stepped forward. I say we fight. His voice carried across the field. We've already killed the master. They won't show mercy whether we run or stay. Rachel nodded beside him. Better to die on our feet than live on our knees. Not everyone agreed. An older man spoke up. Fighting means death. We got children here. And where will they run to? Josaphat asked quietly. How far will a child get before dogs catch them? How many will starve in the woods? How many women will be caught alone? The crowd fell silent, weighing his words. I can't promise we'll win, Josaphat said. I can't promise we'll live. But together, we have a chance. Apart, we have none. He looked at the faces around him, faces that shared his features, his blood. He had never been allowed to be their father. Now he must be their leader. Those who wish to leave, go now. No shame in it. Those who stay, prepare to fight. No one moved. Not a single person walked away. Abner looked around with pride. We stand with you, father. Then we train, Josaphat said. Now. He divided them into groups, placing his oldest sons and daughters in charge of each. Though he had never been a soldier, Josaphat had watched militia drills for years. He had observed how white men trained, how they moved in formation, how they loaded weapons. Stand straight, he instructed, walking between rows of men and women who had only ever known how to bend their backs in labor. 3 lines, front kneels, middle stands, back aims over their heads. They practiced with sticks instead of guns, moving from standing to kneeling, learning to advance in formation rather than scattered. In another part of the field, Rachel led a group gathering weapons. They broke apart plow blades, sharpened hoes into deadly points, and fastened knives to long poles to make spears. Women unraveled metal from worn barrels to make crude caltrops to scatter on roads. We need real guns, Abner insisted as he watched the training. Josaphat nodded. We'll get them tonight. Isaiah approached, dragging a wagon wheel. Look what we found in the barn. He showed how they had attached sharpened metal to the spokes and rigged it to roll downhill. Good, Josaphat said. Place them on the hillsides along the main road. As the day wore on, disagreements erupted. Abner wanted to take the fight to neighboring plantations, to free others, and build a larger army. We strike first, he argued, his young face flushed with conviction. Before they gather their full strength, Isaiah disagreed. Better to hold ground we know. The woods, the creek beds. We can set traps. Josaphat listened to both sides. The sun had begun its descent, painting long shadows across the fields. We need both, he said finally. We need weapons first. Then we need more people. But we also need safe ground to retreat to. He called them together again, their faces now streaked with sweat from a day of preparation. Tonight, we take our first real stand, Josaphat explained. A small patrol will come to check what happened here. They won't expect us to be organized. We'll show them different. As dusk approached, 30 of the strongest positioned themselves in the brush along the main road, a quarter-mile from the plantation entrance. Josaphat chose the spot carefully, a bend in the road where riders would need to slow, with thick woods on both sides for quick escape. They lay in silence as darkness fell. Josaphat's heart hammered in his chest. He had never raised a hand against a white man before last night. Now he was planning an ambush. Remember, he whispered to those around him, take the weapons first. We need guns more than we need their deaths. The wait seemed endless. Insects chirped in the grass. An owl called from the trees. Then came the sound they were waiting for. Hoofbeats, approaching slowly. Voices drifted toward them on the night air. Probably just drunk and killed each other. Never seen a slave uprising last more than a day. 5 riders rounded the bend, lanterns swinging from their saddles. They rode casually, rifles resting across their laps, unworried. Josaphat waited until the lead rider passed his position. He clutched a sharpened hoe handle, muscles tense. "Now!" he shouted. The rebels surged from the brush like a wave. The horses reared in panic as dark figures grabbed at their riders. The first man went down with a shout, pulled from his saddle by 3 sets of hands. The second fired wildly into the air before a thrown spear caught him in the side. Josaphat leaped forward, dragging a third rider to the ground. They struggled in the dirt, the white man's face twisted with shock and fear. Josaphat's hands found the man's rifle and wrenched it free. "Devil!" the man screamed. "Damn devil!" Abner appeared, bringing a club down on the man's head, silencing him. The brief fight ended as quickly as it began. 4 of the riders lay dead or unconscious. The 5th had escaped, his horse galloping away into the night, carrying news of the ambush. "Quickly!" Josaphat ordered. "Take everything. Weapons, ammunition, horses." His people stripped the fallen men of rifles, pistols, powder, shot pouches, and knives. 4 good horses were led away, prizes that would serve their cause. Abner hefted a rifle, eyes bright with triumph in the moonlight. "First blood to us," he said. Others gathered around the spoils, excitement rippling through them. Someone let out a whoop of victory. "Quiet," Josaphat warned. "This is just the beginning." The escaped rider would spread the alarm. By morning, every plantation owner for miles would know that the slaves of Barren Plantation were not just killers of one master, but organized rebels with guns. As they melted back into the woods, Josaphat felt the weight of their small victory. They had weapons now. Real weapons. They had tasted success. But they had also shown their hand. The response would be swift and merciless. In the darkness, his children moved around him, their faces transformed by the night's work. They were no longer field hands and house servants. They were soldiers now, fighters for their freedom. Night spread its dark blanket over the plantation. Stars appeared one by one in the sky, watching over the rebels below. Around small fires scattered through the woods nearby, Josaphat's children gathered in tight circles. The flames were kept low, just enough for warmth and comfort, not enough to be spotted from a distance. The day's victory had lifted their spirits. They had weapons now. They had stood against white men and won. The impossible suddenly seemed possible. Near one fire, a woman began to hum softly. The tune was familiar, a work song they'd sung in the fields for years. But tonight, the words were different. "No more driver's lash for me," she sang in a hushed voice. "No more, no more." Others joined in, their voices barely above whispers. "No more master's call for me. No more, no more. No more auction block for me. No more, no more." The song spread from fire to fire, a quiet rebellion floating through the night air. Some tapped sticks against logs to keep time. Others swayed with closed eyes, as if tasting freedom in the melody. But not everyone shared in the celebration. Dinah, one of Josaphat's eldest daughters, sat apart, her face troubled in the flickering light. She was a tall woman with keen eyes and a thoughtful manner. While others sang, she stared into the flames. Josaphat noticed her silence and moved to sit beside her. "Something troubles you," he said simply. Dinah looked up at him. 5 men dead yesterday. 4 more today." Her voice was low. "How many tomorrow? The day after?" "They would kill us all without thinking twice," Josaphat replied. "I know." Dinah poked at the fire with a stick. "But is blood the only path to freedom? All this killing? Are we becoming what we hate?" Around them, the singing continued. But Josaphat heard the murmurs of similar doubts from others. Not everyone had the stomach for war. Not everyone believed victory was possible. "We didn't choose this path," Josaphat said, loud enough for others to hear. "It was chosen for us, the day they brought our ancestors here in chains." Before Dinah could respond, a rustling came from the trees. Everyone tensed, hands reaching for weapons. Abner and two others raised their newly acquired rifles. "Who goes there?" Abner called out. "Friends," came a reply. "Friends seeking freedom." From the darkness emerged a group of 12 people, men, women, and 3 children. Their clothes were ragged, their eyes wide with fear and hope. "We're from the Crawford place," said a man at the front. "Heard what happened here. Saw the smoke from the big house." "How'd you get away?" Josaphat asked, standing. "Overseers was called to help hunt you all down," the man explained. "Left only 2 behind. We took care of them." His face hardened at the memory. "Been hiding in the woods since morning." Josaphat welcomed them into the camp. Food was shared, space made around fires. As the night deepened, more came, 7 from the Johnson plantation, 5 from Wilkins, a family of 4 who had been hiding in the swamps for 2 days. The rebellion was growing beyond Josaphat's blood. Word had spread like wildfire, slaves rising up, masters dead, freedom in the air. With new people came new voices, new opinions. Around one fire, a heated discussion broke out. "The swamp is our best chance," argued an older man who had just arrived. "My daddy lived there 3 years before they caught him. We can build shelters, hunt, fish, and live like animals," countered Abner, "while they hunt us down one by one." "Better than dying in a fight we can't win," the man shot back. Near another fire, a different argument flared. "We should march on the town," insisted a young woman from the Crawford plantation. "Take the courthouse, the jail, free our people there." "That's madness," Isaiah replied. "They have cannon in town, proper soldiers." "Then we burn it down," she cried. "Burn it all down." The camp was splitting before Josaphat's eyes. Some wanted to flee, others to fight. Some sought mere survival, others bloody revenge. The unity of the morning was fracturing in the night. Dinah looked at Josaphat, her earlier doubts reflected in the growing chaos. "See? We don't even know what freedom means yet." Josaphat watched the arguments intensify. A shoving match broke out between 2 men with different ideas. Women pulled children closer, eyes darting nervously from group to group. He had to act. This fragile rebellion would tear itself apart before sunrise if he didn't. Josaphat walked to the largest fire at the center of camp. From his belt, he pulled something that gleamed in the firelight. Virgil Barron's walking cane. The silver handle was shaped like a lion's head, its metal darkened with dried blood. He raised it high. "Look at this!" he called out, his voice cutting through the arguments. The camp fell silent, all eyes turning to him and the cane in his hand. "This cane struck my back more times than I can count," Josaphat said. "This cane pointed at children, our children, and sold them away. This cane touched our women when they couldn't say no." He turned the cane slowly, letting everyone see the blood still crusted on its silver head. "This is what owned us," Josaphat declared. "This is what decided if we ate or starved, lived or died." In one swift motion, he thrust the cane into the heart of the fire. Sparks flew upward as the wooden shaft caught flame. "Now it burns." The simple words hit the gathered rebels like a physical force. Someone began to clap. Another let out a whoop. Within seconds, the entire camp erupted in cheers and shouts. People jumped to their feet, embracing one another, some with tears streaming down their faces. The burning cane became a symbol that united them all, those born on barren plantation, and those who had just arrived, those who wanted to fight, and those who wanted to flee. It reminded them of what they were fighting against, what they had endured, what they would never return to. Even Dinah stood and joined the celebration, her eyes reflecting the flames that consumed the master's cane. In that moment, they were one people with one purpose: freedom, by whatever means necessary. The eastern sky lightened from black to deep blue, then to pale gray. Morning dew dampened the grass as Josaphat walked the perimeter of their makeshift camp. He had barely slept, spending the night moving between groups, settling disputes, and planning their next move. 2 scouts he'd sent out the previous evening hadn't returned. Worry gnawed at him. Had they been caught? Killed? The longer they were missing, the darker his thoughts became. A shout from the edge of camp broke through the dawn's quiet. Josaphat turned to see 3 figures emerging from the tree line. 2 were his scouts, Samuel and Jacob, and between them they dragged a 3rd man who stumbled and fought against their grip. "We got something, Father," Samuel called out, his voice carrying across the camp. People stirred from their sleep, emerging from makeshift shelters to see the commotion. Abner approached from the opposite direction, rifle in hand. As they drew closer, Josaphat saw their captive clearly. A white man in a militia uniform, his face bruised and bloodied, his hands bound with rope. The gold braid on his shoulder marked him as an officer. "Found him leading a patrol about 3 miles east," Jacob explained, breathing hard. "We jumped them from the trees. The rest scattered, but we grabbed this one." "Captain," Samuel added with a hint of pride. "By his uniform." The captain glared at Josaphat, his eyes filled with hate and fear. Blood trickled from a cut above his eyebrow, and his once neat uniform was torn and dirty. "Bring him to the center," Josaphat ordered. The camp came fully awake now. People gathered in a circle as Samuel and Jacob forced the captain to his knees in the middle. Josaphat stepped forward, looking down at the man who, just days ago, would have had the power to order his whipping or hanging. "What's your name?" Josaphat asked. The captain spat on the ground. "I don't talk to property." A murmur of anger rippled through the crowd. Abner stepped forward, raising his rifle butt to strike, but Josaphat held up a hand to stop him. "Your name," Josaphat repeated calmly. The captain looked around at the faces surrounding him, all black, all angry, all armed with something. He swallowed hard. "Captain Ellis Thornton," he finally said. "Georgia State Militia." "How many men coming after us?" Josaphat asked. Thornton pressed his lips together, refusing to answer. Josaphat nodded to Samuel, who produced a knife and held it to the captain's throat. "Try again," Josaphat said. "2 companies," Thornton replied, his voice shaking slightly. "About 150 men. Artillery coming from Savannah." Whispers of fear spread through the gathered rebels. 150 trained soldiers against their ragtag group of barely 60 fighters. "When?" Josaphat pressed. "Tomorrow, maybe the next day," Thornton said. "They're gathering from different counties." Josaphat walked slowly around the kneeling man, thinking. An idea formed in his mind. Dangerous, desperate, but possibly their only chance. "You write dispatches to your commanders?" he asked. Thornton hesitated, then nodded. "Get paper," Josaphat ordered, "and ink." A woman hurried to the supplies they'd taken from the big house and returned with a small writing desk, paper, and an inkwell. "You're going to write something for us," Josaphat told the captain. "I'll die first," Thornton spat. Josaphat leaned down until his face was inches from the captain's. "No, first we'll kill the men we captured with you." Thornton's eyes widened. "What men? My patrol escaped." "Did they?" Josaphat's voice was quiet, dangerous. "Are you certain?" It was a bluff, but Thornton couldn't know that. Doubt crept into his expression. "Then we'll start with your fingers," Josaphat continued. "One joint at a time. The way overseers do when they catch a slave who can write." The captain looked around at the hard faces surrounding him. These people had already killed their master, their overseer. They had nothing left to lose. "What do you want me to write?" he asked, his voice hollow with defeat. Josaphat motioned for the writing desk to be placed before the kneeling man. His hands were untied, but Abner kept the rifle trained on him. "Write that the Barren Plantation Rebellion has been put down," Josaphat dictated. "Say the slaves have been captured or killed. No reinforcements needed. Sign it as you would a real dispatch." The captain's hand trembled as he dipped the quill in ink. For a moment, Josaphat thought he might refuse, but then he began to write. When he finished, Josaphat took the paper and handed it to Dinah, who could read. She scanned it quickly and nodded. "It says what you asked." "Now one more," Josaphat said. "To the garrison at Fort Hamilton, tell them the situation at Wilkins and Crawford plantations is under control. No need to send men." Again, the captain wrote as instructed, his handwriting growing steadier as he worked. "Samuel," Josaphat called, "you and Moses will deliver these. Wear the clothes we took from the patrol. Ride fast." Samuel nodded, taking the dispatches carefully. As they prepared to leave, a new energy surged through the camp. Hope, fragile but real, spread from person to person. If the dispatches worked, they might have days before the militia realized the truth. "What about him?" Abner asked, nodding toward Captain Thornton. "Tie him securely," Josaphat ordered. "He may still be useful." As the captain was led away, people began pulling items from the big house stash. Ledger books recording slave purchases, auction records, punishment logs. Years of their lives reduced to columns of numbers and cruel notes. "Burn them!" someone shouted. "Burn them all!" A large fire was built in the center of the camp. One by one, people came forward to throw the hated documents into the flames. With each ledger that caught fire, cheers erupted. A woman tossed in the punishment book, crying out, "20 lashes for dropping a plate." "Burn!" A man threw in an auction record. "My wife and baby, sold to Texas." "Burn!" Another added the breeding records, the shameful documentation of Josaphat's forced role. "We are not cattle." "Burn!" The fire grew higher as more records fed the flames. Someone began to beat a rhythm on an overturned bucket. Another joined with a makeshift drum. The rhythm caught hold, and people began to dance around the fire. Tentative at first, then with growing abandon. It was dangerous to make so much noise, to have such a large fire in daylight. But caution was momentarily forgotten in the rush of joy. For most, it was the first time they had ever danced freely, without the master's permission, without fear of the lash. Children who had been solemn and frightened now laughed and spun in circles. Women who had kept their eyes downcast for years now lifted their faces to the sky. Men who had bent their backs in fields now stood straight and tall. Josaphat watched from a distance, Abner beside him. His son's face glowed with the reflected firelight, his eyes bright with triumph. "Look at them, father," Abner said softly. "Just look." Around the fire, Josaphat's children, his blood, danced and sang with others who had joined their cause. For this moment, they weren't fugitives or rebels. They were simply people, tasting freedom for the first time. "Is this what it feels like?" Josaphat asked, his voice barely audible. "Freedom?" Abner placed a hand on his father's shoulder. "Yes," he said. "This is just the beginning." Josaphat allowed himself to smile, a rare expression on his weathered face. For the first time since the rebellion began, he let himself believe, not just in survival, but in true freedom, in the possibility of a life beyond chains and whips and humiliation. For the first time, freedom felt real. The quarters were quiet in those hours before sunrise, filled with the soft sounds of breathing and the occasional creak of wooden bunks. Josaphat sat with his back against the wall, his eyes half closed but alert. He couldn't remember the last time he had truly slept. Perhaps it was before Virgil Barron's blood had stained his hands. Perhaps it was years before that. Nearby, Dinah slept curled on her side, her face peaceful for the first time in days. Abner dozed sitting up, his rifle propped against his shoulder. Around them, the other rebels rested where they could, on bunks, on the floor, some even outside under the stars. The night was warm, and the air smelled of smoke from the dying fires where they had burned the plantation records. Josaphat allowed himself to feel a moment of pride. His children had shown courage he hadn't known they possessed. They had fought, planned, and for a brief moment yesterday, they had tasted what freedom might be like. The false dispatches Captain Thornton had written might buy them precious time to strengthen their position, or perhaps even escape farther into the swamps. Outside, the sky remained dark, but a faint grayness to the east hinted at the coming dawn. Most of the camp would sleep another hour at least. They needed the rest. Josaphat's eyes drifted shut, but a soft sound snapped them open again. Footsteps, too careful to be casual. He remained still, watching through barely open eyes as a figure moved silently through the doorway. It was Ezekiel, one of his sons who had grown up working in the big house rather than the fields. Josaphat had noticed the young man keeping to himself since the rebellion began, avoiding the celebrations, watching the others with wary eyes. Now Ezekiel paused at the doorway, looking back as if to make sure no one had seen him. His face, illuminated briefly by the dying embers of the fire, showed a mixture of fear and determination. Then he slipped into the darkness. Something cold settled in Josaphat's stomach. He considered waking Abner, but hesitated. Perhaps Ezekiel was just restless, or needed to relieve himself. But the careful way he had moved, the backward glance, it spoke of secrecy and purpose. Josaphat rose silently, stepping over sleeping bodies until he reached the doorway. By the time he got outside, Ezekiel was nowhere to be seen. "Something wrong?" Dinah's voice came from behind him, making him start. "Ezekiel left," Josaphat said quietly. "Didn't look right." Dinah frowned. "He's been quiet since we killed Master Baron. Some say he cried when he heard." "Cried?" Josaphat turned to face her fully. Dinah nodded. "He was the master's houseboy since he was small. Served at his table, slept in the warm kitchen. Never felt the field work like the rest of us." "Which way would he go if he wanted to find white folks?" Josaphat asked, a sick feeling growing in his gut. Dinah's eyes widened as she understood. "The county road, east, toward the Wilkins place. That's where the militia was gathering." "Wake Abner," Josaphat ordered. "Get everyone up and ready to move, now." While Dinah hurried to rouse the camp, Josaphat stared into the darkness toward the east. Ezekiel had at least an hour's head start. If he was indeed heading to betray them, the boy would reach the militia by sunrise. Inside the quarters, people stirred with confusion and alarm as Dinah and Abner woke them. Questions flew, but there was no time to explain fully. Josaphat returned and gave quick, terse orders. "Pack only what you need. We move into the swamp before dawn." "What's happened?" Abner demanded, his rifle already in hand. "Ezekiel's gone," Josaphat said. "I think he's betraying us to the militia." Abner's face darkened with rage. "I'll find him." "Too late," Josaphat cut him off. "He's got too much of a head start. Our only chance is to leave now." The camp exploded into activity. Women gathered children and supplies. Men checked weapons and prepared to move. But they weren't fast enough. Many were still half asleep, confused by the sudden alarm after yesterday's victory. "Father, look!" Dinah called from the doorway, pointing east. The horizon had lightened enough to reveal a distant dust cloud on the county road. Even as they watched, the first glint of metal appeared, bayonets and cannon barrels catching the pre-dawn light. "They're coming," Josaphat said grimly. "Too many to fight in the open." Abner rushed to his side, surveying the approaching force. "We could make a stand in the big house," he suggested. "Use it as a fortress." "No," Josaphat shook his head. "They have cannon. They'll blast us to pieces." "The swamp, then," Dinah said. Like you planned. Yes, tell everyone. The rest of his words were lost in a deafening roar. The ground shook as the first cannonball struck the earth near the quarters, sending dirt and splinters flying. Screams erupted as people scattered in panic. "They're in range already!" Abner shouted over the noise. Another blast, closer this time. The side of the nearest cabin exploded inward, wood and bodies flying through the air. Chaos engulfed the camp as people ran in all directions. "To the swamp!" Josaphat bellowed, trying to direct the panicked crowd. "Stay together!" More cannon fire. The ground shook with each impact. Through the rising dust and smoke, Josaphat could see militia forming lines, advancing with muskets at the ready. They had been prepared, positioned perfectly. Ezekiel had told them exactly where to find the rebel camp. "Father!" Dinah screamed, pointing behind him. Josaphat turned to see Abner standing frozen, staring down at his chest, where blood bloomed across his shirt. A cannonball had struck nearby, sending deadly splinters through the air. One had pierced him just below the ribs. Time seemed to slow as Abner's knees buckled. Josaphat lunged forward, catching his son before he hit the ground. Around them, the world dissolved into smoke and screams as more cannons fired. "I'm sorry," Abner whispered, blood bubbling at his lips. "I wanted to see freedom." Josaphat cradled his eldest son, this child he had never been allowed to raise, who had nonetheless grown into a man of courage. Words failed him as he watched the light fade from Abner's eyes. "Father, we must go." Dinah was pulling at his arm, her face streaked with tears and soot. "We can't help him now." But Josaphat couldn't move, couldn't release his son's body. Around them, the rebellion collapsed into chaos. People who had danced with joy just hours before now ran for their lives or lay broken on the ground. The quarters that had briefly been a place of hope were now burning, torn apart by cannon fire. Through the smoke, Josaphat saw the militia advancing in neat rows, their bayonets glinting in the first rays of sunrise. The dream of freedom was dissolving like morning mist, burned away by betrayal and gunpowder. In his arms, Abner's body grew still. The survivors stumbled through thick mud, their feet sinking ankle-deep with each exhausted step. The swamp stretched before them, a maze of cypress trees, their gnarled roots rising from dark water like the fingers of drowning men. The midday sun beat down, but beneath the tree's heavy canopy, shadows pooled like ink. Josaphat moved like a man possessed, his clothes still stained with Abner's blood. He hadn't spoken since they'd fled the plantation, carrying nothing but grief and the rifle he'd stripped from his son's dead hands. Behind him trailed what remained of his children and the other rebels, barely half of those who had celebrated freedom the night before. Dinah helped a limping woman through the mud, her face streaked with dried tears and soot. Her eyes never left her father's back, watching him push deeper into the swamp without looking back to see who followed. "We need to rest," she finally called out. "People are dropping." Josaphat stopped, turning slowly. His eyes seemed to look through her rather than at her. He nodded once, gesturing to a small rise where cypress roots formed a tangled shelter. The survivors collapsed where they stood, sinking down against tree trunks or sprawling on patches of damp earth. Some sobbed quietly. Others stared blankly ahead. A few tended to the wounded, tearing cloth into makeshift bandages. "My baby girl," a woman wailed suddenly, rocking back and forth. They shot her while she was running. She wasn't but 7 years old. Her cries opened a floodgate. Others joined in, voices rising in a chorus of loss and pain. "My husband, my brother." They burned them alive in the quarters. A man named Isaiah, one of Josaphat's middle sons, stood up, his face twisted with rage as he pointed at Josaphat. "This is your doing," he spat. "You made us believe we could win. You filled our heads with talk of freedom, when all you wanted was to kill the master." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the group. Josaphat remained silent, his face unreadable. "Half our people dead," Isaiah continued, his voice rising. "For what? So you could have your revenge on Master Baron? We were better off before." "Better off?" A woman named Ruth stood, her arm in a bloody sling. "Better off being worked to death? Better off watching our children sold? You'd go back to that?" "At least we were alive," Isaiah shouted. "Now we're hunted. They'll track us down like animals." The group fractured, some nodding with Isaiah, others shaking their heads. Fear and exhaustion had poisoned their unity, turning grief to blame. Dinah watched her father, waiting for him to speak, to defend himself. But Josaphat remained silent, his eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the trees. "It was Ezekiel who betrayed us," Ruth said, "not Josaphat." "And who made Ezekiel choose sides?" Isaiah demanded. "Who forced him to pick between his people and the only life he knew?" "Josaphat did, when he let us kill the master." The argument spread, voices rising. Some wanted to separate, to flee in different directions. Others suggested surrendering, hoping for mercy. A few stood by Josaphat, but doubt had infected even his staunchest supporters. Dinah moved through the crowd until she stood before her father. His silence frightened her more than his rage would have. "Father," she said quietly, "they need you to speak." Josaphat's eyes slowly focused on her face. "What do you want me to say?" His voice was rough, as if he'd forgotten how to use it. "The truth," Dinah said, loud enough for others to hear. "Did you start this for us, or for yourself? Was it freedom you wanted, or just vengeance?" The question hung in the heavy air. Around them, the arguments quieted, as people turned to hear his answer. Josaphat looked at his hands. Abner's blood had dried there, cracking in the lines of his palms. "I wanted," he began, then stopped. For the first time, Dinah saw uncertainty in his eyes. "I wanted to stop being cattle," he finally said. "I wanted my children to stop being bred like animals." He looked up, scanning the faces around him. "Was there vengeance in it?" "Yes. Every time Baron made me." He stopped, the memory still too raw. "Every time. I thought of killing him. But that wasn't all I wanted." He stood straighter, his voice growing stronger. "I wanted you all to know your own strength, to feel what it is to stand up. Even now, half of us dead, I would not take it back. Because yesterday, for one day, you were free. You stood tall. You burned the books that called you property." Some nodded, remembering the fire, the dancing. "But now we die for it," Isaiah said, though with less anger than before. "Maybe," Josaphat acknowledged. "But we die as men and women, not as cattle." Dinah watched hope struggle against despair in the faces around her. Her father's words had steadied them, but fear still held them tight. "The militia will find us," someone said. "There's no escape from this swamp." Josaphat was quiet for a moment. Then something changed in his face, a hardening of purpose, a decision made. "Perhaps we don't escape," he said slowly. "Perhaps we make them fear following us." Heads lifted, eyes focused on him. "The swamp is our ground, not theirs," Josaphat continued. "We know how to move here. They don't. They have guns," Isaiah pointed out, "and men to spare. And we have nothing to lose," Josaphat countered. He looked at each face in turn. "If we run, they hunt us down one by one. If we fight together, we write our names in their nightmares." He raised his voice, strength returning to it. "If we die as men and women. But they will remember. They will tell stories of the slaves who rose up, who killed their master, who fought back. They will whisper about us to frighten their children. And our children, those who survive, will hear those stories and know their people were not meek." His words hung in the air. Slowly people straightened, shoulders squaring despite exhaustion. "I'm with you," Ruth said first, holding up her good arm. Others followed, not all at once, but one by one, until most had joined. Even Isaiah gave a reluctant nod. Dinah watched the change sweep through them. Not hope exactly, but purpose, a determination to make their deaths mean something if they could not have their lives. The despair that had threatened to drown them receded. Not gone, but held at bay by Josaphat's vision of a rebellion that would live in memory even if they did not. Darkness fell over the swamp like a heavy blanket. Shadows stretched between cypress trees, turning the water black. Josaphat moved silently, his feet finding solid ground where others saw only mud. Behind him, the survivors followed in a ragged line. "Step where I step," he whispered back. "The water gets deeper here." They had spent the afternoon gathering what weapons they could. Knives fashioned from broken tools, 2 rifles taken from the dead, and a handful of pistols with precious little powder. But Josaphat knew weapons alone wouldn't save them. He led them to a wide clearing where the swamp opened into a shallow basin. Moonlight glinted off the dark water. "The militia will come from there," he said, pointing to the firmer ground at the basin's edge. "They'll follow our tracks until they reach this water." Dinah looked around. "They'll just go around it. Not if we make this the easiest path." Josaphat's voice was steady now, calculating. "Isaiah, take 10 people and cut cypress branches. Ruth, find vines, anything that can be twisted into rope." They worked through the night. Some dug shallow trenches, filling them with water to make the basin seem passable. Others wove snares from vines, setting them at neck height between trees. The most dangerous work was building the rafts, small platforms of branches tied together, each topped with a bundle of pitch-soaked rags. "The torches stay unlit until I give the signal," Josaphat instructed. "When they do light, the militia will move toward them, thinking they've found us." A young woman named Sarah, barely 17, asked the question on everyone's mind. "What if they don't come? What if they just leave us be?" Josaphat's grim laugh held no humor. "They'll come. Men like them can't let slaves taste freedom and live to tell about it." By midnight, the traps were set. Rafts floated silently on the water. Snares hung invisible in the darkness. The deeper mud pools were marked only by small reeds that the rebels would know to avoid. Josaphat positioned his people in 3 groups, one to the north among thick cypress roots, another to the east on slightly higher ground, and the last, which he would lead, hidden in tall reeds to the south. "No one fires until you hear my shot," he told them. "Then aim for officers first, the ones giving orders." They settled into their hiding places as the moon rose higher. Minutes stretched into hours. Some dozed where they crouched, exhaustion finally claiming them. Others prayed quietly, their whispers barely audible above the chorus of frogs and insects. Dinah stayed near her father, watching his face in the dappled moonlight. He seemed transformed, no longer the silent, obedient stud who had endured decades of humiliation, but a commander planning battle. "How did you learn this?" she asked softly. "I watched," he replied, eyes still scanning the swamp's edge. "Every militia drill on the plantation, every hunting party. I listened when soldiers passed through during the war with Mexico. I remembered. Before dawn, they heard it. Dogs barking in the distance, men's voices carrying across the still water." Josaphat touched Dinah's arm. "It begins," he whispered. The militia appeared at the swamp's edge like ghosts in the pre-dawn light. At least 30 men with rifles and dogs straining at leashes. Their captain surveyed the basin, then pointed to the path Josaphat had deliberately left visible. "They're through there," the captain called. "Spread out, 10 yards apart. We'll flush them toward the county road." The militia moved forward, boots squelching in mud. Dogs splashed ahead, following the scent trail Josaphat had laid. The men advanced confidently, rifles held ready, jokes passing between them about slave hunting and rewards. When the first soldier reached the center of the basin, Josaphat struck flint to steel. A spark caught the cloth on his torch. He touched it to an arrow, knocked it to a bow stolen from Baron's house, and let it fly. The flaming arrow arced through the gray dawn light, landing on the nearest raft. The pitch-soaked rags burst into flames. Within seconds, a dozen torches blazed across the water, creating the illusion of rebels fleeing. "There they are!" a soldier shouted. The militia surged forward, rushing toward the floating flames. That's when the first man hit a snare. The vine caught him around the neck, yanking him off his feet. He dangled, choking, as his comrades stared in shock. Josaphat's rifle cracked, and the militia captain fell face first into the water. Chaos erupted. Rebels fired from 3 directions, their shots deliberate, aimed. Militia soldiers returned fire wildly, shooting at shadows and floating torches. More men triggered snares or sank into deep mud pools disguised as solid ground. "They're all around us!" someone screamed. The dogs broke free, running in terrified circles before disappearing into the swamp. Josaphat moved through the reeds like a ghost, reloading and firing methodically. Around him, his children did the same, attacking and retreating, never staying in one place long enough to become targets. A soldier stumbled near Dinah's position. She rose from the reeds, a knife in her hand, and struck without hesitation. The man fell without a sound. The swamp itself seemed to turn against the militia. What had appeared as solid ground became deadly traps. Men who tried to retreat found themselves waist-deep in mud. Those who charged forward met gunfire from unseen enemies. The battle lasted less than an hour. As gray dawn brightened to morning, the swamp basin had become a graveyard. Bodies floated in the shallow water, or lay half-submerged in mud. The few survivors fled, carrying tales of demons in the swamp, of an army of slaves who appeared and disappeared like spirits. Josaphat gathered his people quickly. "We move now," he ordered. "They'll be back with more men." The rebels melted away, deeper into the wilderness, leaving behind only smoke rising from the dying torches and whispers carried on the morning breeze. They took what weapons and ammunition they could salvage, along with a victory none had truly expected. As they moved, Ruth limped alongside Josaphat. "Where do we go now?" He didn't slow his pace. "South, then west. There are Maroons in the deep swamps near the Florida Territory. Free black settlements hidden where no white man goes." "Will they take us in?" Dinah asked. "They will," Josaphat said, "and they will remember what we did here." The survivors vanished into the swamp's embrace, leaving behind no trail for dogs to follow, no footprints in the mud. Behind them, the morning sun illuminated their handiwork, a defeated militia, a battle won against impossible odds. The story would spread, first as rumor, then as legend, of Josaphat and his children, who had turned a place of death into a battlefield, who had made the very earth rise up against their oppressors. Weeks passed. Summer heat thickened the air across Georgia. In plantation houses from Savannah to Atlanta, masters gathered on wide porches with whiskey glasses trembling in their hands. "Have you heard?" they asked each other. "About Baron's place?" The story traveled from mouth to mouth, growing more terrifying with each telling. It reached across county lines, crossed state borders, spread through dinner parties and salons. They say he had a slave, a stud. Fathered hundreds, 200 children, I heard. They rose up in the night, butchered Baron in his bed, cut him to pieces while he begged. The men drank deeper. Women fanned themselves harder. Eyes darted to the fields where their own slaves worked, suddenly wondering what thoughts stirred behind those lowered gazes. "What was the slave's name?" they asked. "Josaphat," came the answer. the name spoken with dread, as if summoning a devil. On a cotton plantation 30 miles from Barron's Land, a master ordered his overseer to check every cabin after dark. "Count them," he demanded. "Make sure they're all accounted for." That night, the overseer found 7 empty beds. The slaves had vanished like smoke, heading for the swamps. In Charleston, a merchant refused to sell chains to a slaver, claiming his supply had run out. Later, he whispered to his wife, "They'll just end up killing more white men with them." At a church in Mobile, a preacher thundered from his pulpit about the dangers of teaching slaves to read. "Look what happens when they get ideas," he warned. Virgil Barron educated his slaves, and they murdered him for it. The planters didn't know that Barron had done no such thing. But fear needed fuel, and lies burned as well as truth. In slave quarters throughout the South, the story traveled differently. Whispered at night when overseers couldn't hear, passed through kitchens and laundry rooms from field to field. Did you hear about Josaphat? 200 children he had. All rose up together. Fought back, they did. Escaped to the swamps, set traps for the militia. Made the very earth swallow up white men. In these tellings, Josaphat grew taller, stronger. His children became an army. Their rebellion became a triumph instead of a tragedy. Hope flickered in dark cabins, where slaves dared to imagine freedom. On a Mississippi plantation, a house slave named Moses carefully carved a single word into the underside of the kitchen table: Josaphat. When asked by another slave what it meant, he replied, "It means our time is coming." Slave patrols doubled their routes. Dogs strained at leashes, searching for scents that weren't there. Militia companies formed in counties where none had existed before. Laws tightened. No gatherings allowed. No travel between plantations. Harsh punishments for any slave found reading or writing. But fear couldn't be legislated away. It hung in the air like the summer heat, making masters jumpy and slaves watchful. Meanwhile, deep in the swamps where Georgia met Florida, Josaphat and his survivors found their way to a hidden settlement. Escaped slaves had built crude cabins on patches of dry land, creating a community far from white men's reach. They called it Freedom Town, though it appeared on no map. The Maroons welcomed Josaphat's people with caution at first, then with open arms when they learned who they were. "We've heard of you," said an old man who had lived free for 20 years. "Word travels, even here." 37 of Josaphat's children had survived the swamp battle. Others might have escaped elsewhere, north toward freedom, west toward territories where a black man might vanish into new settlements. Some had surely died. But those who lived with Josaphat now built new lives in the swamp's protection. They learned to fish with woven traps, to hunt the small game that thrived in wetlands. They grew rice in shallow pools and vegetables on raised beds. More importantly, they lived as free people, making their own choices, answering to no master. Josaphat's fame grew with each passing week. Bounty hunters who ventured into the swamps seeking reward money never returned. Their disappearance only added to his legend. One evening, as twilight painted the sky purple above the cypress trees, Josaphat walked along a narrow path with Dinah beside him. They had come to check fish traps set earlier that day. "There's news from the north," Dinah said quietly. "A man came through yesterday. Says there's talk of war between the states." Josaphat nodded. He had heard the whispers. Tensions rising over slavery, over states' rights, over the future of a divided nation. "Do you think it will come to that?" she asked. "Men will fight to keep what they believe is theirs," he replied, "even when what they claim to own is other men's freedom." They reached a small clearing where the swamp opened to reveal the sky. Fireflies blinked among the reeds. From the settlement behind them, voices carried on the evening breeze, children laughing, women singing, men talking as they worked. His children, his blood. "Do you ever regret it?" Dinah asked suddenly. What we did at Barron's. Josaphat was silent for a long moment. He thought of Abner, dead in his arms, of others lost during their flight, of the blood that had stained the big house floors. I regret that some had to die, so others could live free, he finally said. But I don't regret breaking our chains. The swamp stretched before them, dark water reflecting the first stars of evening. Somewhere beyond this wilderness, the world of masters and slaves continued. Somewhere, his name was being spoken in fear and in hope. They'll never stop hunting you, Dinah said. No, he agreed, but they'll never stop fearing me either. And fear can break a system as surely as any weapon. He reached down to the water's edge and picked up a torch they had left there earlier. With practiced hands, he struck flint to steel, catching the spark on dry tinder. The torch blazed to life, casting their faces in warm light against the gathering darkness. Josaphat raised the flame high above the water. Its reflection stretched across the black surface, multiplying, becoming many flames from one source. Like his children, like his legacy. They made me a stud, he said quietly. But my children made me a man. The torchlight danced across the endless darkness of the swamp, a single point of fire declaring that even here, even now, freedom burned. I hope you found that story powerful. Leave a like on the video and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. I have handpicked 2 stories for you that are even more powerful. Have a great day.